Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum as it has finally broken through $4,000. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com, where we have covered this move fairly closely for the last several years, this move by Ethereum, and we're going to go through that in this video as well, talk about, what's happened so far, what can we expect from here, what is this move telling us? So one of the things that we talked about extensively is how we can use ETH Bitcoin to tell us when ETH USD is actually looking bullish or not. And one of the ways that we can do this is by identifying each cycle when the Ethereum valuation against Bitcoin bottoms out. Now, you'll notice that in 2016, late 2016, you'll see that ETH bottomed out against Bitcoin. And then it had this massive rally. And then you'll see in 2019, ETH bottomed out against Bitcoin, and it led into this pretty large rally. And now you can see once again, it looks like ETH has bottomed against Bitcoin. Now, you might argue, why is this time different than the other times? Well, there's a few reasons for that. One of the things you should note is that every single time when ETH Bitcoin bottomed, it corresponded to Ethereum going to its regression band, right? Going home, as we call it. For a long time, I said that ETH needed to go home, and once it went home on its USD pair, then ETH could finally bottom against Bitcoin. So if you look at the chart, you'll see every single time that ETH USD went through this phase, every single time, what happened? After it broke down and went home, that is when ETH bottomed against Bitcoin. Now we're going to overlay ETH against Bitcoin, and what you'll see pretty clearly, when ETH goes home, ETH Bitcoin bottoms out, right? You can see it pretty clearly, and it's happened for the third time. So it happened in 2016, it happened in 2019, and it also happened, of course, in 2025. If we go over to the risk chart for Ethereum and take a look at when in the cycle it hits that 0.3 to 0.4 risk level, you can see that it did so in late 2016, late 2019, and April of 2025. All of these corresponded to when Ethereum went home, and it also corresponded to when ETH bottomed against Bitcoin. So the reason why this time it's actually been able to break through $4,000 and the other times it could not was because ETH had to go where the ETH maxis didn't want it to go to allow ETH to finally capitulate on its Bitcoin pair. That is the key element that a lot of people miss, right? Now, ETH was going up this entire time, but the problem is that it was bleeding against Bitcoin. The way that ETH bottomed against Bitcoin was to allow ETH to go home, break down, then ETH Bitcoin bottoms, and then it shoots up, and ETH USD goes as well. Now, we've covered this move very closely. We've talked about different paths, how it might play out. But I want to talk about a couple of things here because a lot has happened, right? Ethereum has broken through $4,000, and we just covered why this time it has been able to do that. I said previously many, many times that after Ethereum goes through this process, it should be able to break out, right? So you had down one, not enough buyers to break through 4K. Down again, not enough buyers. Go home, you find enough buyers. That was when I flipped bullish on it. You form your macro high or low, and then you break up, right? And so, as I said, the next time Ethereum approached 4K, it would likely break through, and it looks like that is now the case, right? You can see that Ethereum has broken through 4,000 US dollars. And hopefully this move can continue. Now, the next major milestone for Ethereum, I'm not going to pretend like there's no major milestones between now and the prior all-time high. I'm sure you could find reasons to suggest there might be some resistance at some of these prior prices, perhaps like 43, 4,400. That was this high right here. But the main level that's going to come into play is the prior all-time high of around 48.67. So one thing we have to remind ourselves is that if this plays out like prior cycles, then it would make sense to expect a pullback in September. Now, there's no such thing as a sure thing, obviously, but I think a September pullback would actually be quite timely. Now, if you look at, and that doesn't, again, we still have time before that, but if you go look at these charts and we simply look at monthly returns, and let's just look at it through the lens of Bitcoin right now, what you'll notice is that in 2013, 2017, and 2021, Bitcoin was green in both July and August, right? So 2013, Bitcoin was green in July and August. 2017, green in July and August. 2021, green in July and August. 2025, so far, green in July and August. But then in 2013, 2017, you can see it was red in September 2013. In 2017, red in September. 2021, red in September. I think you're going to see another red September for Bitcoin. And you might say, well, the last two Septembers were green. Yeah, they were. But guess what? 2015 and 2016 were also green. And then September was still red. So I think what's going to happen is I think that Ethereum is going to continue to try to ride this momentum for about 1 to 2 more weeks. And in that time, I hope that it can come back up here near the prior all-time highs. However, I will say there is a decent chance, it could always wick above it, right? But I would argue there's a good chance you're going to see it come up here, and then maybe 4K could be where Ethereum backtests in September. We went through 2 different paths, and I said the more preferable path was for Ethereum to break through $4,000 in August, and it made sense for it to do so because of seasonality for Bitcoin, right? It's been green in every July and August in all prior post-halving years. Maybe this time's not different. If Bitcoin's green in August and we know ETH is going up against Bitcoin, then it would make sense for Ethereum to be green too. So if Ethereum can run up near the prior all-time highs, I do think it would likely get that pullback sometime, early mid-September. But it should then come back up, I imagine, and actually try to break through here. One of the things you'll notice is that a lot of the prior market cycle tops have ended with a very specific pattern, and that pattern is, up, an aggressive move up, down, up, higher low, consolidate, market cycle top, and then bear market, right? And you can also see that last cycle too, right? Up, down, up, higher low to the market cycle top, and then bear market. So that's what I think it makes sense to look for. We haven't seen that pattern yet. But what if the prior all-time high serves as that, that first point? What if it goes here, back down, back up, and then it breaks through? That's what I'm potentially looking for here. Now, I will say, while ETH looks pretty good on its Bitcoin pair, I think there's going to be a pullback by ETH Bitcoin starting sometime around late August, and I think the next higher low for Ethereum on its Bitcoin pair will occur in September-October timeframe. If I had to guess, I would probably say, mid-October to like the very first day or two of November, if you made me guess. But I think that you'll see a higher low form for ETH on its Bitcoin pair sometime in that September to extremely early November timeframe. If it happens in November, it would be like the first few days. Like I don't think the higher low would occur much later than that. So I would say sometime September, November. If you made me near September to November, early November, if you made me guess even closer, I'd probably say sometime, mid-October to early November to narrow it down even more. But I will say, this move by ETH Bitcoin still looks constructive. And as I've said before, if it's just going to simply repeat what it did the last cycle, I think it makes sense to look for that potential retracement to the 0.5 fib. And this cycle would ultimately correspond to about 0.053, but it's not going to go there in a straight line. Maybe it runs up to 0.04, 0.045, gets a pullback back down to the 0.236, and then rallies up to the 0.5. But Ethereum is also, sucking liquidity out of the altcoin market, and that's the other thing. And by the way, the other reason that this time Ethereum was able to break through 4K as well, is if you look at Ethereum dominance, it also swept the low, right? It swept the low from the prior cycle, and then now it's gotten this big move back up to the upside. And again, this is further proof, right, that Ethereum did in fact go home. We saw it go home in its USD pair. If you look at ETH Bitcoin market cap ratios, you can see it went home on that. And so just a lot of the ways you measure it, it more or less went home. And you might say, and I've gotten into trouble on Twitter for saying this, but I've said this many, many times, this is not alt season, right? This is Ethereum season. And a lot of people don't like that because they're like, well, look, I mean, my altcoin's up 5%, 10%, whatever. The problem is that alts keep bleeding against ETH, right? I mean, they're down another 9% this week, right? They keep bleeding against Ethereum. And I'm not suggesting that the bleed's going to last forever. Previously, I said, remain bearish on alt ETH pairs until they hit about 1.5. It's getting closer, but I still think the base case here is that alts will bleed to Ethereum. And I could see that happening for at least another 1 to 2 weeks. I would expect a rotation back to Bitcoin starting around late August. I don't think it's going to be obvious until September, but I think you'll see alts probably top out a local top on their Bitcoin pairs late August. It could correspond to when Powell is going to speak at Jackson Hole. I believe that's like August 23rd or sometime around that time frame. But I think that's going to happen. And if you look, if you look at alts on their Bitcoin pairs, you can see they had this nice rally in 2017 as well. They still found a local top in late August, and then that liquidity flowed back into Bitcoin. So I do think you're going to see that liquidity flow back. Now, here's the nuanced view, right? All Bitcoin pairs are still looking good, right? They're still bullish right now, but the reason they're bullish is not in and of themselves. They're bullish because ETH is going up against Bitcoin. The only reason that altcoins are going up on their Bitcoin pairs right now, in my opinion, is because ETH is going up against Bitcoin. Do you guys remember? It's the same thing we talked about with Ethereum going up on its USD pair for so long, right? Ethereum is going up on its USD pair. That was great, right? I mean, great, it's going up on its USD pair, but who cares if it's bleeding to Bitcoin during that time, right? So a lot of people thought that was Ethereum season, but it was bleeding to Bitcoin the entire time. Now it has been Ethereum season because alts are bleeding to ETH. Now you might say again, maybe your altcoin's doing fine, but again, collectively, the altcoin market is bleeding to Ethereum, and historically, alt season does not look like this, where they're just bleeding back to ETH, right? This is not what alt season looks like. Again, it doesn't mean that alts can't go up. In fact, alts will likely continue to do well against Bitcoin for at least another couple of weeks, if I had to guess. What I'm arguing is that it doesn't matter because they're bleeding against Ethereum, right? It's Bitcoin dominance all over again. Just replace it with Ethereum, right? So alts are now bleeding against Ethereum. And a common misconception that I see all over Twitter is that a lot of people sort of say that Ethereum rallies and then alts, right? It's the way it goes is Bitcoin, Ethereum, then alts. But here's the problem, right? Here's the problem. Think about how many times over the last few years you've heard people say, well, alts will rally after Bitcoin, and then they don't, right? They just keep on bleeding against Bitcoin. Think about how many times over the last few weeks you've heard people say alts will rally after ETH, and then they just keep on bleeding to ETH. This is the classic example of people selling their winners for the losers, and they keep thinking the losers are going to catch up, and they keep not catching up. So while I do think a rotation is coming, I don't think it's a rotation into alts in the way that people are thinking. That doesn't mean that alts won't go up on their Bitcoin pairs. They probably will in the short term, over the next 1 to 2 weeks. What I'm saying is that when the ETH rally against Bitcoin cools down, and I think that cool down period will start in a couple of weeks, you're going to see alts likely immediately cool down. They're not going to run, in my opinion, the same way that a lot of people are thinking. It doesn't mean you can't have that phase, but what happens if that phase comes the next time ETH rallies, right? So again, you're likely going to see another rotation where Ethereum cools off, it puts in a higher low, but the rotation, in my opinion, is not back to altcoins at this point in the cycle. It's actually going to likely be back to Bitcoin in the September to October timeframe. So it's Ethereum season right now, right? It's Ethereum season right now, and it has been for a while. It's broken above 4K. The next major milestone is going to be, 4,800, 4,900. And I wonder if it does something like this, where it runs up, back test that, back up, higher low, and then breakout. Could that be how this runs? I will say this. If it does not get a pullback off 4,800 and it just goes above it immediately, then you might actually just go right into a market cycle top a lot sooner, right? If it doesn't spend more time consolidating, say between $4,000 and $5,000. So what I would like to see Ethereum do is, try to see it go back up near the all-time highs. Maybe it can go above it and put in a new high, but I do think it's going to come by about late August, and then you're going to see that pullback in September, probably, a pullback by Bitcoin that's going to cause Ethereum to go back down, maybe back down to 4K or so. Try again, reject again, and then break through. Could definitely see that happening, right? And this has been playing out for such a long period of time. In my opinion, right now, I think it does not make sense to fade Ethereum. When alts are bleeding to Ethereum, even Bitcoin right now is giving ground, losing ground in the short term to Ethereum. I don't think that liquidity flow back to Bitcoin is going to durably happen until a couple of weeks from now, right? So the way I think it makes sense to play this, in my opinion, is just ride the ETH wave, expect to pull back in September, right? But, I'm thinking, hey, maybe ride it for another couple of weeks. Hopefully Ethereum can hit those new all-time highs. And if it gets a pullback in September, then hopefully it can lead to sort of a regrouping before then moving back up again in October. Okay? So that's kind of the path I'm looking for. If 4,800 provides no resistance, that's fine. It just means that it might mean that the top it won't be as high is the problem. Okay, so the way that you get, in my opinion, right, the way that you get a higher market cycle top is to see a cool off period in September between $4,000 and $5,000. Okay, that's how you ultimately see a higher market cycle top. If you don't get that and it just screams through this thing, then you probably sort of pull forward some of that stuff and you don't get the consolidation, and then therefore it doesn't go as high. Okay, because then people just chase, they FOMO in, and then that ends up being that. But I will say, if it were to do something like this, where it goes up and then comes back down to maybe 4K, and it kind of oscillates in there, it would chop up the altcoin market on their Bitcoin pairs, maybe send alts to the range lows on their Bitcoin pairs. And if you look at Bitcoin dominance, it's gone below 60%, but I still go back to this idea here of, what if Bitcoin dominance just tags this trend line again by late August, right? Late August, rallies on up September, October, and then maybe November, you see Bitcoin dominance drop again. That's basically what happened in the 2016, 2017 cycle, right? You saw Bitcoin dominance drop in June and going into late August, and then it rallied back up into late October, early November, and then you saw the big drop. So I could definitely see something like that happening. So keep an eye out for that. Ethereum breaking 4K is great news. This was always the baseline expectation. Why was it the baseline expectation? Because ETH bottomed against Bitcoin for the market cycle. Why did Ethereum bottom against Bitcoin for the market cycle? Because Ethereum went home, right? This is the power of Ethereum going home. After it goes home, it rallies to new highs. And I think that's what we're in the process of seeing right now. And a lot of people keep fading it and saying it's not going to break. And we're saying it wasn't going to break through 4K because that's all they saw. They kept thinking it was going to break before. What they were missing, I think, was that it needed to go home. It allowed ETH to bottom against Bitcoin. And now it has the momentum that it needs. And it's sucking that liquidity from, obviously you have the treasury companies and the ETFs and all that stuff. But the bigger narrative, in my opinion, is you're getting this massive bleed by altcoins into Ethereum. And I think it's likely going to last for at least another 1 to 2 weeks. After a couple of weeks, let's say this, in about 2 weeks, I think the bleed by alts to ETH might be over in the short term. I still think they could bleed, but I think you're going to get some type of mean reversion in September, October. So you could see Bitcoin dominance go up in September, October, you could see alt Bitcoin pairs go down, but you might actually see alt ETH pairs go up because there's going to be some type of mean reversion. Okay, so again, it's really not that complicated. It's just ETH is going up. Alts are going up against Bitcoin. And they likely will for, a little bit longer. But by September, October, I think it's going to be going back into Bitcoin. So alts are going up against Bitcoin. They're bleeding against Ethereum. And maybe this all changes whenever Ethereum breaks new all-time highs. But for now, I think it makes sense to assume alts will underperform Ethereum. They will short-term continue to outperform Bitcoin, but only for a couple more weeks before the seasonals kick back in and that liquidity flows back into the king in September, October timeframe. A lot of people ask is, do alts go down on their Bitcoin pairs because Bitcoin's going up or down? The answer is yes. Maybe alts bleed against Bitcoin in September if Bitcoin gets a pullback, and then they could bleed against Bitcoin in October if Bitcoin then gets another move up. Right? So the answer is yes when people ask me that question. For now, it's still Ethereum season. I would say for a couple more weeks, and then we'll see rotations. But for now, that's what I'm thinking. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. And if you guys want to follow this analysis closer and look at the risk levels and get more in-depth analysis on this stuff, make sure you check out intothecryptoverse.com. We do have the sale going on, ITC Premium. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in.